let's talk about the refrigerator in an RV. A couple things to talk about. Most of them look just like this. Almost all of them look like this. And they generally just have an on and off switch. Some of them will have a temperature gauge on the outside that you can adjust the temperature from 0 to 9. I always say put it on 9 because RV refrigerators don't get that cold. They only get about 50 degrees if you're lucky. So not like your house where it can get down to like 35 or so. Freezers get nice and cool, but the fridge is not so much, which I'll explain that more in a minute. They usually have some type of latch system to keep them locked so they don't fly open while you're driving, whether it's a push latch. Don't just yank on these handles. You got to push the latch to pop them open. Some of them will be slide latches, etc., etc. And then you just pop them open, make sure they're cold. A refrigerator, so we asked in our welcome email, there's a couple of questions that we usually ask, and one of the questions is, do you want the fridge turned on beforehand? We generally default to turning it on. Some people don't because of different reasons, but that's fine. But we generally default to turning the refrigerator on to make sure it's cold. If it's not on when you pick it up, it will take 4 to 6 hours to get good and cold. So bear and keep that in mind. If for some reason, if you pick it up and it's not cold for whatever reason, maybe we forgot to plug it in or turn it on or whatever the case may be, keep that in mind that if you have to put food in there immediately, you're likely going to need to buy some bags of ice to kind of put it in there, you know, prematurely to cool it off to get things cold right away. These are just glorified coolers. That's all they really are. So again, keep all of that in mind. So the freezers do get nice and cold, and you can keep things actually frozen in there for a long time, which is great. Just because you have plenty of space in here to put things doesn't mean you should, because that means this fridge is going to work overtime to keep things nice and cold. The other rule is if you have warm food or beer or something like that that you want to put in here and you want it to get cold, it's best to make sure that it's cold first before you put it in. Otherwise, again, it's going to make the fridge work overtime and it's going to feel like it's not getting cold. Even right now, I've had this thing on and it's just chill. It's not that cold. Some of them will have a slider, which you can't really see right now. Some of them, to actually adjust the temperature, will have a slider on the inside, and you raise that slider all the way up and that'll make it colder. I don't know if those things really work or not, but who knows. But anyways, that's how the fridges work. One other thing I did want to mention, again, if it's not cold enough for you, or if it's not keeping some of your items plenty cold, you can put a bag of ice in there to supplement it. If the bag of ice starts melting or whatever, I usually say put it in like the bottom tray and whatnot, so that way it doesn't leak all over the place. The other thing that's cool about the bag of ice is you can throw it in the freezer when you're done, and then you can dump it down the toilet to help knock sediment around if you've got toilet paper or something stuck to the side of the black tank. Of all the RVs that we have, this is the first year, 2019, that we have a real household fridge in a motorhome. I am not a fan of them. I do not like them. I don't prefer them. I'm not saying you shouldn't rent that RV, but know this: in order for it to operate, you actually have to be running the generator full time or have full hookups where you're going. Otherwise, you will not have a refrigerator because it runs off of external shore power, 110, 120 volt. So it's the only one that we've ever had. So if you happen to have that particular model, you may want to just double check or ask. Basically, if it doesn't look like this, then you may want to ask if it's a real fridge. If it's a real fridge, then those rules apply. And we are not liable for food that goes bad or spoiled or indifferent, because you have to keep power on it 24/7 in order for it to operate. Whereas these, which I didn't mention, they just have an on and off button, and it's just keep it on auto. If it's on auto, like right now, we don't have external power. It's running off of the propane and battery system, and that'll run, you know, until your battery runs out or your propane runs out, which will last a long time. But once I plug in, it'll immediately switch over to alternating current, which again, it's seamless, and it will just keep things cold 24/7. So while you're driving, it's cold. When you plug in, it's cold. It should always be cold. If these aren't cold for some odd reason, check your propane, make sure it's on, make sure your battery voltage is good, and make sure you've got good power. The other thing is if you're on any kind of an incline or a slant more than 6 or even 3 degrees sometimes, which isn't much, these things will not stay cold. So you want to try to be level wherever you're at, wherever you're parked. If your check light ever comes on, usually the culprit is you don't have electricity or your propane is turned off for some reason. If that's the case, you want to turn it off, let it sit for like 15 seconds or something, turn your propane on, make sure you got a good flow of propane, and then turn it back on, and usually that check light will come off. Wait and look for it for about 30 seconds. As long as that light doesn't stay on, you should be good and the fridge should be working. All right, let's talk about probably one of the most important things in the RVs and that is your control panel. This is where you're going to monitor your tank levels. This is where you're going to keep an eye on your battery voltage. A lot of times your generator will be connected, your slide rooms, all sorts of different gizmos and gadgets. So I'm going to kind of go over them one at a time and explain them. If you have your slide room control on them, again, it's pretty simple, straightforward, in or out, like so. Obviously don't operate it when you're not meaning to operate it. With the water heater, I always highly recommend using the gas side, not the electric. Yes, you can use the electric, but that means you need the generator running or external power. Otherwise, you will not have hot water. Why I recommend propane is because it's always on and it's just going to pull from your propane tank. If you heard me flip that switch on, you would hear the pilot light on the outside, which means it's automatically heating the tank. It's going to work just like your house, so it's just going to keep the water hot. It'll shut itself off automatically when it doesn't need to be used. And because propane is so cheap and effective, it's much better than electric. The other thing about electric is that if you are breaking ampage, like if you've got the AC running and you've got the electric hot water heater on, the moment you plug something in, you've already probably broken 30 amps. So again, I always recommend the gas when it comes to the water heater. Water pump. So I've got the pump on right now. Sometimes they have lights, sometimes they don't. All gauges are different. Don't ask me why. So just turning it on and off. Why you need a pump is because if you are dry camping or boondocking, that means you have to pump water out of your fresh water tank in order to get running water in the system. Again, if you have shore power or shore water or city water connection, you don't need the pump and you can leave it off. But when you may need the pump is when you're driving. So if you're going from point A to point B, somebody needs to use the toilet or wash your hands or whatever the case may be, you'll turn the water pump on in order to utilize that stuff. If you have an Arctic pack, or if it says winter pack or water heater tank, or I'm sorry, not water heater, tank heaters, it could say various things. You don't need those. Those are for the winter time only, and that's to keep the outside exterior black, fresh, gray tanks warm and so they don't freeze over. So you don't need to generally mess with those. Sometimes you'll have light systems built into the control panel. Again, I don't know. So you just kind of have to look around and see and play with them and whatnot. Now, let me go over the levels. I don't know why this is very confusing, but it tends to be confusing with people. So I will explain it as if you're a kindergartner, so don't take offense to this. LPG, I already mentioned this, liquid propane gas. When I push that button, it's going to light up some dials. E means empty, F means full, just like your fuel gauge, okay? So if you have a battery sensor, I'll explain that in a moment. Obviously, if this red dot were only on the E, guess what? You're empty. If it's on the full, it's full, okay? It's really that simple. As it drops, that means you're using your propane. And this works for any of the buttons I'm gonna press. So battery, usually battery would work the same way. So right now we're actually showing a third, or I don't even know what F even stands for, low something, I don't know what these even mean. But that means I should be charging, which I'm gonna fire up the generator here in a moment and we'll show that. Because once this dial, or once these dots drop even 1 bar, if you're dry camping or boondocking, you're gonna wanna fire up the generator so you're not stranded or so you don't lose power to your systems. So that's how you check your auxiliary battery. Something I failed to mention is you have 2 battery systems in a motorhome. You have the coach battery, which I showed you on the exterior, that is strictly for the engine and the drivetrain and your radio and things like that. You have a coach battery, which is for the motorhome itself, which is going to power all your lights and your gizmos and gadgets and stuff on the inside. So again, if the battery starts to drop any number of dials, you're going to want to get some type of external power to charge the battery systems. Yes, your engine will charge the battery while you're driving it, so you can always turn the engine on as well. Freshwater tank, as you can see, it is F for full. Okay, that means it's full. Keep an eye on your freshwater tank. People don't realize how much fresh water they use, or gray water, I should say, that they use. Most of the RVs are only about 30 gallons. That's it. So keep that in mind when you tell me, oh, it wasn't full. Look, these sensors work. They are full when they leave. I can't control how much water you use to wash your hands or wash your dishes. Don't tell me that you were washing dishes for 30 seconds and you ran out of water. I don't believe you. I'm so sorry, because I know how long they last. Black is going to be right here. See how it reads empty? When you pick it up, that's how it should be reading. If it's not, make sure that they notate what the level is when it's reading. And if it reads something else when you pick it up, that's what we expect it to be when it comes back, okay? So if it's reading empty, guess what? You gotta get that black reading empty when you come back. Gray water is always pretty straightforward. That one's always reading empty. And once you pull it and drain it, it's usually always reading empty. So that one's usually a no-brainer. All right, last thing to go over, if the generator is attached, some of the Class A's, they'll be in 2 different locations. You'll have it on the control panel and you might have it on the dash. But in the Class C's, they're generally located with the control panel. So, starting and stop the generator, just hold the button down. Ah, and it did power up. Now, the battery was low when we started. See how it automatically jumped up to full? If you remember on this particular model, I plugged in that plug on the outside box, so it powers up the coach. But something that I was going to mention, if the battery was too low and the generator wouldn't start, you can always hold this button down and it'll show it's trying to start, and it might not. There's called an emergency start button, which I will show you later on the dash to help fire up the generator if it's low voltage. So you can see the hours right here. We charge $1 an hour to use the generator. Use it as much as you need to. In the summertime, if it gets too hot, like July, I know that's why you need the roof AC and the generator, but guess what? If it gets too hot, it may die on you. So keep that in mind. They do run hot, but if they get too hot, they will die. But anyways, it's $1 an hour. Use it as much as you need to. Remember, the outlets do not work when you're driving. When you're driving, you gotta turn this on if you wanna use the outlets, okay? Just keep that in mind. And for the roof AC, so I'm gonna turn the thermostat on the back so you can kind of hear the air kick on since I have the generator running. We don't need to pan to it because I'm just gonna do it. The AC just kicked on. It'll usually take a minute to get cold. And again, make sure it's off before you fire up the generator and or plug into the external posts so you don't pop a breaker. And we'll talk about the AC here more in a minute. Otherwise, that should be it for the control panel. That should cover everything. Some of them may be a little bit different. I did mention we do have a couple of newer ones that are LCD displays. It's the same, it's just all push button. It's kind of annoying, but it is what it is. If you have any questions on any of this, again, feel free to ask the representative. One thing I didn't mention about the gas water heater, sometimes you'll see that fault trip. Sometimes they'll have a fault light or the fault light will be built into it. That means your propane is probably turned off and you need to go outside and turn on your propane because it didn't actually light. All right, real quick, just since I've got the AC running, I just want to show you this real quick. Most of the units have a ducted system, and what that means is you can either get air blowing directly below the AC and it's only cool right here, or you can close it and then it will go to the rest of the vents throughout the motorhome. So if you want cold air in the back and cold air in the front, you got to make sure to close these vents in order for that to work.